In the dim light of their modest living room, Peter Foster's heart sank as he saw his 13-year-old son, Jimmy, trudge through the door, his face a canvas of bruises and a distinctly crooked nose. The sight struck Peter. "Jimmy, son, what happened?" he asked, his voice laced with a cocktail of concern and rising anger. Jimmy, his eyes downcast, mumbled something inaudible, the words lost amidst the pain and shame that colored his tone. Peter, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, led him to the couch with a reassuring squeeze. "You can tell me, Jimmy. Whatever it is, we'll face it together," Peter urged, his own memories of childhood injustices flickering in the back of his mind. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Jimmy finally let the words spill out. "It's Miles and Connor, Dad. They've been bullying me. Today they said I looked at them wrong during lunch and they broke my nose." The words hung heavy in the air, a testament to the silent battles Jimmy had been fighting alone. Peter's heart broke for his son, the anger now a raging inferno within him. "I'm so sorry, Jimmy. No one deserves to go through that. Have you talked to the teachers?" Peter inquired, though he already suspected the answer. Jimmy shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "They don't care, Dad. Everyone's scared of Miles and Connor. Even the teachers act like nothing's happening. I have no one to talk to at school." The realization that his son felt so isolated, so utterly abandoned by those who were supposed to protect him, fueled a sorrow in Peter that was hard to articulate. He stood, masking his turmoil, and walked to the kitchen. "Let's have some milk, champ. It always made things better when I was your age," Peter said, more to himself, clinging to the ritual as a lifeline in a sea of helplessness. Returning with 2 glasses of milk, Peter sat beside Jimmy, the white liquid a stark contrast to the darkness enveloping their conversation. "Jimmy, listen to me," Peter began, his voice firm yet gentle. "You're not alone in this. I know it seems like the whole world is against you, but I'm here. We'll figure this out together." The evening had settled over the Foster household like a heavy, somber blanket, the kind that stifles more than just the cold. Inside, the quiet was almost tangible, broken only by the soft, intermittent sobs from Jimmy's room. Peter Foster stood at the threshold, his heart aching anew with each muffled cry from his son. Jimmy lay curled on his bed, the glow from the streetlight outside casting shadows across his room, painting a picture of solitude that mirrored the turmoil within. Tonight, the wounds were not just physical, they were soul-deep, reaching back through the years to a loss that time had done little to heal. Jimmy's mother, gone 3 years to a relentless illness that had left an indelible void in their lives. The memories of today's injustices at school intertwined with the pain of loss, creating a maelstrom of grief that Jimmy could scarcely navigate. The relentless bullying by Miles and Connor, the humiliation, the physical pain, and the isolation, it all seemed insurmountable in the shadow of his mother's absence. Sitting beside Jimmy, Peter placed a comforting hand on his son's back. "I know it's hard, Jimmy. I miss her too. Every day," Peter whispered, his voice thick with shared sorrow. Jimmy turned to face his father, tears streaking his face. "Why do they hate me so much, Dad? What did I do to deserve this?" he asked, the weight of his experiences heavy in his voice. Peter sighed, searching for words that could offer solace, knowing full well the complexity of cruelty and the scarcity of easy answers. "You didn't do anything to deserve this, Jimmy. Some people, they just choose to be cruel because of their own pain or insecurities. It's not a reflection of you." Seeing his son so dejected, Peter felt a deep-seated need to connect, to offer Jimmy a glimmer of hope, a sense of kinship in their shared struggles. "Can I tell you a story, Jimmy? About when I was your age?" Peter offered gently, hoping to bridge the gap between their pain with his own past. Intrigued despite his sorrow, Jimmy nodded, wiping his eyes as he settled back against his pillows, a silent invitation for his father to continue. Peter took a deep breath, casting his mind back to his own youth, to a time when he too had faced bullies and felt the sting of isolation. When I was 12, life was a battleground, not just at home but at school too. I was the quiet kid, the one who found solace in books rather than in the rough and tumble games that fascinated my peers. My father, a harsh and often abusive man, saw my quiet nature not as a trait but as a flaw. He believed in tough love, in the cruel idea that a real man faces his problems with fists and fury, not thoughts and words. He'd mock me, calling me a bookworm, a sissy, insisting that I needed to man up. School offered no respite. 3 of my classmates, Ryan White, Brandon Collins, and Eric Davis, took it upon themselves to ensure my days were filled with torment. They were relentless, their cruelty a constant shadow over my daily life. My father's lessons at home left me ill-equipped to deal with them. I was trapped in a cycle of violence with no way out. One day, during gym class, the coach stepped inside, leaving us unsupervised. I sat out as usual, my nose buried in a book, trying to escape. That's when Ryan decided to target me. He kicked balls straight at my face with such force it broke my glasses and smashed my nose. The pain was immediate and intense, but the laughter that followed was worse. Brandon and Eric joined in, hurling insults, calling me a lowlife while I lay there, blood pouring from my nose, trying desperately not to stain my clothes with it. In that moment of humiliation, I saw Ellie Jones, the girl I secretly admired. For a brief second, our eyes met, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, she felt sorry for me. But then she laughed along with everyone else. The betrayal of that moment, the realization that there was no sympathy, no ally among my peers, was more painful than any physical wound. That day marked me more than any other. It was a brutal reminder of my solitude, the stark reality that I was utterly alone. My father's lessons on manhood only deepened my isolation, teaching me that vulnerability was a weakness, that seeking help was a failure. Barely getting up, I went into the shower and began to wash the blood off my face. The blood was easier to wash away than the offense and emotional pain. I skipped the last classes and returned home. Sitting in my room in silence and solitude, I felt the pain and resentment burning my chest. Inside, there was nothing left, only emptiness, like a gaping black hole that sucked in the remnants of my life force. My father came closer tonight. He entered my bedroom and saw my face. My father asked me to show my fists, and I extended my hands. He examined them and said that I had been beaten up again, and I didn't even try to fight back. My father became the first person who got what he deserved. I regret that I did it too quickly. When I plunged the knife into his neck, he opened his eyes and started grabbing his neck. His eyes widened in horror. He tried to stand up, but I knew where to hit so he would die quickly. I had read about it after all. I am a bookworm. Under the cover of night, I rode out of the yard on my red bicycle. Just 1 block and I was already at the White's house. I hid the bicycle in the bushes and walked around the house. It was not hard for me to open the already slightly open first-floor window wider. Quietly stepping in the dim light of the house, I searched room by room for the person I was looking for. A few minutes later, I stood over the sleeping Ryan White. The last thing Ryan saw, gasping and choking on blood, was my smile. I whispered to him that I forgave him. I stood by the window and was about to climb out of the house, but then I thought about the guilt of his parents. It was their fault that they raised such a scumbag. It was a forced measure. I understood that I was doing the right thing. I killed Mrs. and Mr. White. They got what they deserved, as did their little bastard. I pulled my bicycle out of the bushes and rode on. It was no more than 2 minutes' ride to the Collins house. That night, luck was on my side. The window in the Collins house was wide open, as if inviting me to enter. First, I killed Brandon's parents. They gasped and kicked. I just stood and watched. No, I did not enjoy it. I understood that I was committing a terrible act, terrible and forced. But the sense of justice gave me strength. I went into Brandon's bedroom. His room was classic for a cool guy. Posters of muscular athletes, images of rock bands and cool cars, a punching bag in the corner of the room. I smiled. I drove the knife into Brandon's neck up to the hilt. I was even surprised by how much strength I had. Brandon's eyes widened. He stared at me in horror and jumped out of bed. Brandon flailed around the room, gasping and howling, knocking everything in his path. When Brandon fell to the floor, having smeared half the room with blood, I heard a female voice from the corridor. "Brandon?" It was his twin sister, Trish. I heard footsteps in the corridor and stood behind the door. Trish entered the room and emitted a muffled scream at the sight of Brandon's body. I pounced on her from behind, wrapped my right hand around her neck, and started to strangle her. She tried to escape and screamed. When I was done with Trish, I approached the window and saw a light in the neighboring house. A female silhouette in the lit window tried to peer into the Collins house. After some time, the light went out. I realized that I had made a mistake. In the Collins garage, I found a canister of gasoline. Waiting an hour for everything to calm down and the neighbors to fall asleep, I set the neighboring house on fire. From the bushes, I heard the screams of people burning inside the house. I saw a person engulfed in flames running out of the house with a wild scream and falling on the lawn, not waiting for the residents of the entire street to gather. I left there on my bicycle. The Collins got what they deserved, but the death of the Collins neighbors was a forced massure. I could not get into the Davies house. All the windows were closed and I could not pick the lock without making a lot of noise. I had no choice but to simply burn their house. As the flames began to rise, I rode away to a safe distance to avoid attracting attention. Terrible screams from the house only began to reach me when the house blazed like a Bengal fire. The screams and cries for help did not last long. Soon everything subsided. Only the noise of the fire and the restless voices of neighbors who had run out into the street from their homes remained. No one came out of the Collins house. That night, I had to break into 3 more houses. It was a forced measure. I had to cover my tracks. All 3 families cast too obvious a shadow on me. Moreover, my father was part of that shadow. I returned by dawn. The sun had not yet appeared over the horizon. I wiped the knife, gathered my thoughts, and plunged the knife into my stomach. I knew where to insert the blade to avoid inflicting a fatal wound. After all, I am a bookworm. Opening the door, I crawled out onto the street and began to call for help. Mrs. Rogers, our beloved vigilant neighbor, quickly noticed me through the window. I was taken to the hospital and was quickly taken care of. There were several conversations with the police. I told them how some psycho attacked me in my bedroom, and my father fiercely protected me. The officer regretfully informed me that my father did not survive. I even cried a bit. That night in our small town, 24 people were either killed or burned alive. The locals called it the Silent Massacre, and the killer was nicknamed the Beast. I was the only survivor of this massacre. No one suspected me. I was the unfortunate victim, and moreover, a sissy and a bookworm. As Jimmy lay under his covers, the weight of his father's words settled over him. The story wasn't just a series of events. It was a mirror to his own life, to the bullying and the sense of helplessness that had become his daily companions. Yet, in the twisted justice of the story's conclusion, where the tormentors face their comeuppance, Jimmy found a dark solace. Got what they deserved, he whispered into the silence of his room, a mantra that brought an unfamiliar comfort to his bruised spirit. Yes, son, that's right. Peter's voice was a steady presence in the darkness, affirming the moral of the story. It was a lesson in the inevitability of consequences, a bitter pill coated in the sweet satisfaction of retribution. "I love you, Daddy." Jimmy's words were soft, a tender acknowledgement of the bond they shared, strengthened by their shared vulnerabilities and the unspoken understanding between them. "And I love you, son," Peter replied, his voice thick with emotion. In those 4 words lay the entirety of his commitment to Jimmy, a promise to protect, to guide, and to be the ally his son so desperately needed. As Peter stroked Jimmy's head, a gesture filled with love and reassurance, he turned off the lights, leaving the room bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. The darkness no longer seemed as oppressive, nor the night as full of terrors. Jimmy fell asleep with a smile on his face, a rare moment of peace amidst the turmoil of his young life. The next morning, Jimmy woke up in a great mood, for the first time in several years. He slowly sat up in bed, touching the cold floor with his feet. There was something on the desk. Jimmy put on his glasses and approached the desk. On the table lay a large hunting knife with a bow. Under the bow was a note. "Got what they deserved.